Hello, my name is Maxwell Johnson. I teach liturgical studies in the Department of Theology here at the University of Notre Dame, and I am what is known as a Benedictine Oblate. So the first thing I want to talk about in this series on Benedictine spirituality is the Oblate movement itself. Sometimes called rather humorously monastery fan clubs or even monastic groupies, Oblates of St. Benedict are part of an ever-increasing community of hungry seekers after God who desire to be a part in some way of Benedict's school for the Lord's service by associating themselves with a particular monastery. The monastery with which I'm associated as an oblate is St. John's Abbey in Collegeville, Minnesota. In one of the introductory essays to her Work of God, Benedictine Prayer, Sister Judith Sutera of the Order of St. Benedict provides us with a brief overview of the Oblate movement, noting that as early as the 9th century in Europe, there were individuals and families who were enrolled as associates in various monasteries, and that rules for the reception of oblates were being composed by various abbots during the 11th through the 16th century. Such oblates lived either within or outside the monastery. Today, notes Sutera, for those who desire a more formal, permanent commitment, any man or woman can become part of the monastic family of any monastery of either gender which accepts oblates. These persons make a formal commitment to Benedictine prayer and values. They are united to the prayers and works of the monastery to which they are oblates, even as they continue to carry on their lives in their own locale and lifestyle. Unlike various third orders or associates, Benedictine oblates are always connected to the particular monastery where they made their oblation, although if their life circumstances change, such as a move to a new location, they may transfer that oblation to another monastery closer to where they are living. As we heard, after a year of studying the rule of St. Benedict, Benedictine oblates make a formal commitment to Benedictine prayer and values in their lives. What does that mean concretely? Before going on, it's important to note that Benedictine spirituality, a life centered in prayer and values as concretized in the rule of Benedict, is but one expression of the life in Christ to which our common baptismal plunge into his paschal mystery of death and life calls all people. And one does not need to become an official oblate of St. Benedict to adopt a Benedictine spirituality. Indeed, it's available for all people, and one does not even need to visit a Benedictine or Cistercian, Trappist, or Camel de Lise abbey to embrace it, though I'm sure one might want to. What I wish to do with you and share with you is a four-part series. First, Benedictine spirituality is a values-based spirituality centered in Christ. Second, Benedictine spirituality is a liturgical spirituality centered in what Benedict's rule calls the Opus Dei, the work of God. Third, Benedictine spirituality is a listening spirituality centered in the Scriptures. And fourth, Benedictine spirituality is an ecumenical spirituality centered in hospitality. So first, Benedictine spirituality is a values-based spirituality centered in Christ. Although written for male and female monastics in the 6th century, the rule of St. Benedict has been used as a guide for life by several non-monastics throughout history. How, then, might that rule and its several values be a guide for life in Christ today? In other words, how might you find the rule and its values applicable to your own life here and now? Or as Brother Bennett of Blue Cloud Abbey in Marvin, South Dakota, puts it in the title of one of his delightful books, how might we be monastics without leaving our day jobs? So what are these values, or what some have called a gospel way of life for men and women to which St. Benedict invites us in his rule. The first word in the rule of Benedict, which encapsulates everything else in the rule, is obsculta, listen. So we might say that seeking to listen, to actively listen with the ear of our heart, in the words of Benedict, for what God, to what others are saying to us, even to what all created things might be telling us, is indeed the first and final thing. It's not surprising that Benedictine communities are often on the forefront of ecological issues in the way in which they take care of the land and its resources. In fact, some have called this the value of stewardship, of listening to the earth, of being caretakers of the earth, and of all things placed in our care. The reverence for the things of the earth, even the tools we use, gets expressed in Benedict's rule as regard all utensils as if they were the sacred vessels of the altar. The key to all of Benedictine spirituality is developing this sense of active listening, especially in a contemporary context of continual noise, of continual speaking and sound. As in monastic communities, so in families, it means to listen closely to one another, to learn to hear clearly what a spouse or child might truly be saying. Closely related to this is the second value, often referred to as the awareness of God. That is, to look for God not in the abstract, not far above us, but down to earth in the very common and ordinary events of everyday life. For it's through the persons with whom we live and work that God may well be speaking to us if we but listen. Such seeking for God, or an awareness of God in the common and ordinary, is precisely what we mean by a sacramental worldview, where all of created order is potentially a bearer of the divine reality for us. So a Benedictine spirituality of listening is a spirituality which practices awareness of God, who Benedict tells us we believe is present everywhere. A third value is that of community and respect for persons. I remember years ago in a series of workshops in which I participated at St. John's Abbey and at the Monastery of St. Benedict in St. Joseph, Minnesota. How's that for a litany of saints? A Benedictine sister leading one session spoke about community in words like this. She said, "The most difficult and burdensome thing in my life is community. The most wonderful and uplifting thing in my life is community." She made a great point. For it's in community, in relationships, in communal living, that we become who we are through and by our relationships with others, especially as we listen to what others are saying, sometimes about us, to us, and for us, in the continual dialogue that takes place in this life. Benedict says that in the monastery, the younger monks must respect their seniors, and the seniors must love their juniors. And further, no one is to pursue what is judged best for oneself, but instead what is better for someone else. Hence, if in monastic life all of this means to respect each member of the community, regardless of class, background, or professional skill, this too is easily translated to our own lives and families. For perhaps one of the best descriptions of a monastery is that by Benedictine author David Knowles, who several years ago wrote that, simply, a monastery is a family of brothers or sisters under their abbot or abbess. Similarly, even though like parents, abbots and abbesses have decision-making authority in the monastery, Benedict also notes that no important decision should ever be made without calling the whole community together in consultation. As often as anything important is to be done, he writes, the abbot shall call the whole community together and explain what the business is. And this includes listening to the youngest and least members of the community. Modern monastics tend to make decisions by consensus rather than by vote. since voting often produces winners and losers and can be rather destructive of community. Again, is that not a worthy model for decision-making in the community life of families, which are often referred to as little churches in the church? Related closely to community life and respect for persons, the next Benedictine value is that of stability. Monastics often joke about whether they are truly stable or not in their lives. But this vow of stability is again really community related. It means to cultivate rootedness in a place and a community, to stand in one's promises made to a lifelong part of this particular family of brothers and sisters. That is, no matter where an individual monk might be, he or she is always part of that monastery. And even if engaged in various ministries elsewhere for a short time or several years, that monastic will always go home again each year for a time and will look forward eventually to returning there permanently. Again, perhaps the best way to understand monastic stability is to understand it simply as being part of a family. The community is something that's a part of one and goes with the monastic always. Now, some of the other values associated with Benedictine spirituality have to do both with life in community and relationship of the community to those outside. That is, we might say, with the mission of that community in the world. The value of moderation and balance is key here, meaning, of course, to be content with living simply and not beyond our means, to find a balance between our prayer, our work, and our leisure. All things, says Benedict, are to be done with moderation. A good antidote to our contemporary obsessions with the possession of things, with abundance, extravagance, and excessiveness. Benedict also places a high premium on the dignity of work, reminding the monks they are to live by the labor of their hands. In fact, such a high priority is placed upon this that the Benedictine motto is often summarized by the phrase ora et labora, pray and work, even though that particular phrase does not appear anywhere in the rule. But the dignity of work as a share again in the stewardship of God's creation is paramount. And of course, that means attentiveness to the individual gifts held by the various members of the community as their work contributes to the common good of that community. Similarly, the concern for working toward peace and justice in Benedict's rule might certainly be considered additional values. To work toward just social orders in our immediate environments and in the larger society is consistent with Benedict's approach, so that in all things God may be glorified. And that is the real Benedictine motto, ut in omnibus Deus glorificetur, that in all things God may be glorified, which is a verse from 1 Peter 4:11. The working toward peace itself has also become associated with the Benedictine way of life, both in and outside monastic communities, simply because Benedict places such a strong emphasis upon it. He says again, let peace be your quest and your aim. And hence striving for peace with self, others, and God is of paramount importance. Indeed, the traditional medal of the cross of St. Benedict has the word pax, peace, at the very top. And certainly, part of that striving for peace and justice in community life and families and the world is the value of ongoing, daily, and lifelong conversatio and conversio, this ongoing conversion of life into Christ and his paschal mystery in community. For as Benedict says in the conclusion to the prologue of his rule, we shall through patience share in the sufferings of Christ, that we may come to share in his kingdom. Indeed, this spirituality is nothing other than a spirituality of what we call the paschal mystery, a living out of our baptismal plunge into Christ and its continual nourishment in word, in Eucharist, in prayer, in community. A final value that flows from this life is Benedict's emphasis on hospitality. To offer warmth, acceptance, and even joy in welcoming others. Let all be received as Christ, says Benedict. Hence, guests, whether in the monastery or in our homes, are the presence of Christ among us, who by their presence are gifts to us. Benedict challenges us all to look at our practices of welcome and hospitality in our homes and families. But even more, this value asks us to recognize that even those within our families are guests in our lives. Even our children are but guests for a short time, who receive our nurture and hospitality and then move on from us. In our own day, hospitality to the homeless, the immigrant, the poverty-stricken, the hungry. They were there in Benedict's age, they are there in ours, and hence this is a value still much needed. Perhaps at this point you are asking yourselves, what's specifically Benedictine about this spirituality? It all sounds like basic Christianity. And to that I would say you are absolutely correct. What is Benedictine is simply a question of focus and emphasis on drawing particular attention to these values. But of course, Benedictine spirituality is about more than certain values. As important as all these values most assuredly are, and such values are needed today, what makes and keeps individuals and communities Benedictine is being centered in Christ. For the highest Benedictine value is to prefer nothing to the love of Christ. And the way that comes to be expressed is in prayer, both liturgical and private. So the most important Benedictine value next to Christ himself is that of prayer. And it is to that value I wish to turn in the following two sections.